internet's kids out there taking U.S. history and government. Welcome to the show. It's going to be chaos, but hopefully it's going to be beneficial to you if you're taking U.S. history exam in Regents tomorrow morning. So I'm going to make sure it looks like we're live. Now, this is a one-man show, one human show. So I do have Twitter open, I'll be honest. Actually, I should get my phone. I left my phone in the other room. I'm going to grab that on a break. But you guys can tweet me directly, and I'll kind of follow that stream a little bit. And I have hashtag HipHughes that I'm trying to get going, so you can tag your stuff in there as well and help each other out, because I'm only one person. I'm going to go over a lot of ideas, a lot of test strategies, a lot of content. Maybe a couple hours we'll do, try to get you comfortable with everything. But I will say that subscribing to the channel and following me on Twitter is sure to gain you 4 extra points. That's scientifically tested, historian approved, and teacher recommended. So you should probably do that now, because that's what we all do today, isn't it? So why don't we talk a little bit about how we're going to do this. There is a document that is right below the video. So if you go to hiphughes.com on that main page, right under the video, I actually can show you through the magic of the internet. I think we could do screen share, so we should practice. So we're going to share the entire screen. Oh, look at that. All right, so you should be seeing my web browser now. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. So if you go to the main page right here, you can see that underneath it says, So You Want to Pass the U.S. History Review Document. And when you click that bad boy open, it's going to take you to that, the HipHughes U.S. Regents Review. And for the most part, I'm going to try to go through these, and then I'll take a break and take some questions and try to keep that as our foundation. Otherwise, it'll just be too crazy. We won't know what to do. And I am totally prepared. Not only do I have hair gel, but I have a 16-ounce can there of Red Bull. How about that, kids? Don't do that at home without parental supervision. So hopefully that helps you get hooked up here. We should be able to kind of go back to, it worked, look at that. Now, if I flip to the Twitter, I should see that you guys are starting to respond, and we'll get the show going. Yeah, so I think it's going to work. I'm pretty confident. Hopefully somebody's watching. If not, hopefully someone's going to tweet me really, really fastly, feverishly. How about that? All right, guys, so obviously the multiple choice is, you know, a good half of the exam there. You have 50 multiple choice questions. Now, the scale kind of changes year to year, but generally, once you're at 30 out of 50, which is, come on, guys, if you can't get 30 out of 50, we can do this, right? That you're pretty solid to go into the essays. Now, of course, you have that thematic essay and a document primary source essay, and those 2 essays are worth half your exam. And I didn't teach this year, but I'm pretty sure that you can get 1 to 5 on there, total out of 10. So you need at least a 2 and a 3 on those essays, a 5 out of 10, and 30 out of 50, and you're pretty safe. But I think that we can confidently get you up to 30 multiple choice just by doing some kind of big ideas, because at the end of the day, this is a big idea test. If you know certain things about U.S. history, whether or not you know the content, if you have the umbrella, you can be pretty safe. Like we could say one thing about the Constitution, right? The Constitution of the United States, the directions, the blueprints of how you run a country, right, is not only formed to create a limited government, but it's also designed to be flexible. It's the yin and it's the yang. So we'll talk about both of those, you know, ideas about how it limits government through checks and balances and kind of the loopholes of how you pass laws and such like that, separation of powers, and how some other parts like the amendment procedure, the elastic clause, judicial review, which is unwritten, is going to give us flexibility. So these are big ideas, and once you know big ideas, you can be pretty rest assured that you can guess your way out of a lot of questions. So why don't we do a few? Otherwise, I'll talk forever. So if you look at the document, I printed it out old school style. Look at that. I'm like from 1980 and such. So if we look at the first question, generally every other year they seem to do a geography question, and I like to go over geography because it does apply to different questions, like Mississippi River. You get a question, you don't know the answer, and you see Mississippi River, a lot of times it's going to be Mississippi River. It applies to trade and commerce. It applies to the idea of the Louisiana Purchase. There's a lot of ideas, but if we go over the major ideas of geography, what they like to ask is they like this north-south idea, right? During the colonial era, we see that the colonies develop differently. We get kind of this slave agricultural society in the South, and we get kind of this manufacturing business base in the North. There's a reason for that. It's not just like people like, landed and they were like, I want to be a shipbuilder. You have to kind of have the water, So this idea that the natural harbors in the Northeast, right, and having natural resources like timber, lumber, and fur, that made it a natural resting spot for manufacturing. When in the South, we have a much more arid kind of plantation, agricultural friendly climate, and that's going to further develop that area. So those are big ideas as well. But really, river, Mississippi, I'm telling you, they love to put a question on the exam where the answer is going to be something about the Mississippi River. Now, I will say that if you ever get that geography essay question, they do it. I swear, I've seen it. And you have to be prepared to write about how geography has influenced the development of something. Certainly, one of those examples we just went over. Like, if you can't connect agricultural with slavery, like, you probably shouldn't go to the exam. Just stay home, sleep in, watch some cartoons, have a Red Bull. And also that idea that in the North you have this harbor idea for manufacturing. That's a great idea to write about. But the other one is holy stupid Atlantic Ocean. How can the United States grow the way it does without interference? Now, I know we have some small skirmishes like the War of 1812, but for the most part, we're left alone. Why? You think Europe was just like, well, just leave them alone because they'd be cool and such. No! It's because we're far, far away. And that is the Atlantic Ocean. It's the buffer, baby. So if you're going to write about geography, and I've seen this question, in terms of American neutrality and how we're allowed to be neutral in the beginning of World War I, the beginning of World War II. How can George Washington stand up there at his farewell address and be like, we should be isolated and stay away from the wars of Europe? Because of the water, baby. So having some geography under your belt is a really good idea. So we'll just leave it at that. Mississippi River, trade, Louisiana Purchase. It's a big idea. And also this idea of the oceans, the North and the South. And once I saw an Appalachian Mountain question because it was the border of the colonies and such. All right, I'm going to check the Twitter really quick. I really want my phone. We have a couple tweets here. We're looking right here. How do I write the essay, says Sick Boy. Well, first of all, maybe you shouldn't be sick, being a sick boy and such. But I'll give essay advice, and I'll do this right now really quickly without going over content. And the content's going to help you with the essay. So number one, no stop. Try to write an essay about water when you don't know what water is. But in terms of some basic ideas, yeah, write 4 paragraphs or die trying. One of the dots in the rubric is that it's a well-formulated essay. So certainly make sure you format it. You put it into essays and answer the dots or die. You get points for trying, son. How about that? Isn't that nice of them? But what kids do, it's like if you've ever gone to the carnival and the game where you get to throw the softballs at the baskets and such. Like if you have to get 2 of the 3 basket shots in, and they give you 3 balls, and those are the 3 dots, right? Why did the United States stay out of World War I? Give us one reason why we got involved. What's one effect? So you kind of have this kind of a 3-part question, 3 balls per se. Throw all 3. I don't care if you don't know. That sucks. Do it anyway. So write that essay, even if you don't know. One reason the United States was able to stay neutral in World War I was we were very patriotic. Wrong! Well, a little bit right. But the point is, on the rubric, you get a certain level for answering the question directly. So obviously try to make sense and such, but that's one great strategy is write a formatted essay, make sure you aim those darts, those softballs well, and try your best. If you do that, you should be able to squeak out a 2. Now, if you get 2 2s, that sucks. That's not good. You're going to have to pull out a 35 or something on the multiple choice, which might be hard to do. But certainly a formatted essay, and I'll give you examples on the DBQ later, but one thing that I failed to mention is I'm not going to switch screens because it's too crazy. But if you go to the video arsenal, which is linked below the video on HipHughes.com, you can always pause my crazy face, and go watch a video. We have videos on how to write DBQs. I have a video on every stupid thing on the exam. It's just a matter of time at this point. You're like, why'd I find this guy now, right? But certainly watch a video here and there, a 5-minute video on the House of Burgesses or how to write a DBQ or whatever. So that's great. We're getting more tweets because I'm answering them. Can you talk about Supreme Court cases? Says Barca Fami. Counter Beast 101. Yeah, I'll do Supreme Court cases. We're going to get there. We're going to go back to this sheet. How do you present outside information? Oh my God, I'm drowning in questions. Amendments. I have really great ways to go over the amendments. Katie Christine. I'll give you one right now if you don't believe me. Let's play the Bill of Rights hand game. One way to remember the amendments, right? First of all, is to understand that the amendments are added to the Constitution. The Constitution is the blueprint, the directions. When they were done building it, they left a process to add on to it. And the first 10 amendments were ratified were put in order to get ratification, in order for the Constitution to be accepted. So they're called the Bill of Rights. Always remember they're a shield. And that's a question on the exam every year. There's 10 amendments. So this idea of putting them in front of your face and blocking, whoever's at you is this idea of what the answer is, which is the Bill of Rights protects you rights. When you were born, this is the John Locke idea. This is on the exam too sometimes. John Locke says that you're born free. A slave is born free. You're not born a slave. Maybe the first breath you take, someone enslaves you, but they've enslaved your liberty. And this idea is that you're not allowed to take somebody's liberty without a really good reason. So the Bill of Rights is your protection against the federal government trying to take away your rights. So you can always block your face with 10. And then I'll go through them really quick, but the First Amendment, there are 5 freedoms. This is the hand game, but not in a creepy way, I promise. The First Amendment, 5 freedoms: freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, protest or petition. That's the First Amendment. There are 5 freedoms: freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and protest. If you don't know the Second Amendment, 1, 2, then you're dumb. I'm sorry, you're not dumb. You didn't know how to remember it. That's the right to bear arms. The Third Amendment's not in the exam, but the Fourth Amendment, if you put your 4 fingers out and knock, this is the idea of privacy and search warrants, like if you had a po-po at your door. The Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent. This is when you're arrested. These rights kick in to protect you against the police, the government. The Sixth Amendment, your trial rights, like speedy trial. Eighth Amendment, I've always remembered like the number 8, like double nooses, like they're going to hang you. No cruel or unusual punishment. But the big one is 10. And this is the idea of federalism. We're going to teach you something, guys, right? The idea that during the colonial era, right, why were we so upset? We were so upset because we felt as though we didn't have any representation, that the king, that Great Britain had all of the power, and he used that power to abuse us, abuse our liberty, our natural rights, right? No taxation without representation, right? He was locking us up without trial. Or in England, they were taking our houses and put soldiers in them. And the idea was that when we had a revolution and we got the power back, we were never going to give the power to one entity. This is federalism, the division of power between the feds and the states. Now, we won't talk about how that was supposed to be equal in the beginning, and today it's like the federal government and the states. But this is of the idea of the 10th Amendment. I lost track, but I got back to the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is a really hard one to understand, but you can do it. It is called reserved powers. The way you remember it is it's the last amendment, 10, in the Bill of Rights. It's like the last seat you're saving for somebody. What do you call the last seat you save for somebody at a restaurant? Somebody on the internet said reserved. That's right, reserved powers. So the 10th Amendment, listen now, all power not delegated to the federal government. This is the federal government's power. This is constitutional power. This is the right to declare war, of interstate commerce. This is the right to put a military together. This is all of the right the feds have. If it isn't in there, it's reserved for the states. This is the idea. In federalism, it's almost like if your parent, and I know people don't like the parent analogy, but if your parent listed all of the rules they had in the house for you, that you had to empty the garbage on Monday and clean the dishes on Tuesday, if it wasn't in that rule book that they had a right to do it, you'd assume it was your reserved right to do it for yourself. Like if it's not on the list, that you can't put a poster up of, I don't know what kids listen to, whatever your favorite band is, that would be your right. And this is the idea of the 10th Amendment. All right, I'm going to look at Twitter really quick, but we have to go back to this stupid list or we're never going to get anything done, okay? I'm telling you. U.S. intervention during the Cold War. Oh, my God, the anti-feds and the feds, you guys are crazy. Let's go to the list. Let's go to it. Number 2, right here. I'm going to see myself on camera. There we go. So if we go to the list on number 2, and the videos are linked in this list for the most part as well. One of the early ideas on the exam is the vocabulary words, the House of Burgesses and the Mayflower Compact. And I'm going to explain it as a concept because it's a thesis you can use on the exam. And the idea is, if you've ever dated somebody and they were abusive and they locked you up and they chained you up and they never let you see anybody, almost like an abusive relationship you see with celebrities sometimes. I used to use Ike Turner and Tina Turner, and then nobody knew who they were. But Ike Turner was a mean, mean man who enslaved Tina Turner, who was such a beautiful young woman with such a talented voice. And the idea is, once you give them a little bit of freedom, once you let Tina Turner out of the cage, you let her run the town, you know, with her girls. The idea is she doesn't want to come back. So one of the ideas on the exam is that even though we're a colonial entity of Great Britain, that they are abusing our natural rights all of the time, which they're really not all of the time. The idea was that the colonists formed a couple of things that gave them an early taste of freedom. I call it the M&M concept. If you've never had an M&M and somebody gives you an M&M, what do you want after you have an M&M? You want another M&M. So if somebody's never given you the right to have self-government, to govern yourself, to have representation for who makes your laws, and then you get a taste of that, it's like a taste of drugs. People are like, well, I want some more of that. So on the exam, those are the 2 vocabulary words. I'll go over it really quickly. The House of Burgesses was formed in Jamestown in 1619, but it was basically a place where the colonists got to vote for stuff. They got representation, and they would vote on trade deals or what they were going to do with the Native Americans or whatever. But once that representation example was put forth, even though it's going to fall apart, it's going to be a battle cry for the colonists, right? They're going to remember the House of Burgesses. We want that back. And the Mayflower Compact was even before then, on the Mayflower, when they signed a document, all the rich white men and such, where they agreed to agree, where they agreed to have representation among themselves, to discuss things, to vote. That's an early example. So if you just remember them as M&Ms, you'll be all good. And remember the magic word. What we all want in this world is a little bit of representation. I'll say that a lot because representation's a magic word on the exam. That's right, it's magic. It's like a little magic Smurf mushroom or something like that. When you see it, if you don't know what to do, I tell people a lot of the times to go for that word. Like Mississippi is another one. Now don't let it trump your common sense. Number 3, let's do 3 and 4, okay? Number 3, mercantilism or triangular trade. I used to have a really great cartoon on this, and I can't find it. But basically, if we think of the map, we got to switch screens. There's just no doubt about it. Let's switch screens really quick. And what I'd like to do is just grab a world map. So if we do that really quick, guys, just be patient. We can do this. It's a big concept. It's going to be on the exam, I promise you. So it's not a colonial map, but you get the idea. So there we get a world map. We're just going to pop this sucker into a little program. It won't take more than 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How about that? All right, there we go. So this idea of triangular trade is this idea of kind of a pathway from Europe first to Africa. And of course, we know why they're going to Africa. This is to garner human labor. Let's just put it the way it is. To capture people, right? And then to bring them where? To the New World, right? It's almost like, I used to use, I guess I could do it because it's YouTube and it's not a school video. I used to use like a prostitution analogy. Like Europe over here is kind of like, I don't want to say the pimp, but they're the ones with the power. And they're getting foot soldiers to go garner, ladies of the night, raw materials. That's what the slaves are garnering, like cotton. And in the North, where it's not slavery, there's still like lumber and raw materials. You can't do much with a tree. You can't do much with cotton unless you manufacture it. So triangular trade is going to bring those goods back to Europe in order for the pimp. I said pimp. I didn't mean to say pimp. I'm so sorry. in order for Europe to manufacture them and build a profit. Triangular trade is a sham. Triangular trade is a system where Europe is using Africa to take advantage of North America and the colonies for their raw materials. So if you're looking for vocabulary words, raw material, natural resources, and manufacturing, that idea that these ladies of the night are being brought to Europe where they're being produced into money. That's a terrible analogy, and I apologize to everybody for using it. But I think that it works. I'm not sure. All right, let's do another one, and then I'll go to the Twitter, I promise. Yeah, no taxation without representation. I won't go into elitism and how the revolution is really a revolution of the elites for control of their own monetary pleasures in the New World. But this idea that Europe was taxing us, look, they were taxing us for a good reason. I'm not going to lie. They defended us in the French and Indian War. They did. They sent all these soldiers over. They saved our beep, right? And then they were like, all right, now pay the pony, right? And they started raising taxes like the Stamp Act and, all those acts, like the molasses tax and the sugar tax, all of that was to raise the money back. But the problem was that the colonists felt as though they didn't have any representation. Now, Parliament said, we represent you, but this is 3 or 4 generations of Americans. They haven't never set foot in Europe. So the idea that they're representing the interest of the colonies is offensive, especially to the ones that want power, the richer ones, the John Hancocks and the Samuel Adams. I'm going to have a Red Bull drink for Sam Adams right now. It's getting hot in this room. All right, how about that? So look for that representation idea. In terms of causes of the revolution, you're looking at the House of Burgesses, the Mayflower Compact, which are early examples of representation, and that idea of the battle cry of the colonists, no taxation without representation. All right, so we got through 4. How about that? Let's hit Twitter really quick, and then we're going to do our Declaration of Independence. And I love doing the Declaration of Independence. I really do. So we're looking at the Twitters right now. I can't look at messages, guys. If you're sending messages, that's not going to work. It's just too crazy. Common for the thematics. Chloe Reynolds asked that. That's a great question. I always say if we pick 5 big buckets and you have 2 apples for each bucket, you're probably pretty safe. So I would have 2 examples of Cold War, for sure. We'll go over those a little bit later. I have tons of videos on those, but just knowing like even the Berlin airlift, which is a really easy one, or the Marshall Plan, just 2 examples where the United States is trying to contain communism. And then have another foreign policy, have imperialism. I call it belly rubbing, right? When America is growing through the industrial age, and factories, what do factories need? Factories need raw materials. We're becoming the pimp. So we need to fill our belly. So we have Panama Canal or Cuba and the Spanish-American War. These are foreign policy endeavors that are meant to fulfill the hunger of imperialism. Now, same thing with containment in the Cold War or neutrality and having just the example of Wilson trying to keep us out of World War I or Washington's farewell address. So that's a big one, foreign policy. Have 2 domestic programs. New Deal is really easy, and maybe laissez-faire, which you can use at industrial age. Or if you want to be a little bit more suave about it, you can use like Fair Deal or Square Deal. There's all these deals. Absolutely having 2 big change areas, like revolutions. Like the Industrial Revolution is a big change part, or progressive era, big change. So it's hard to say what they're going to be. If you have these buckets, though, foreign policy, domestic policy, 2 Supreme Court cases, I always say that court cases do 1 of 2 things, actually 3 things. Supreme Court cases can do this, which means strengthen the federal government. They can do this, which means expand your civil liberties, or they can do this, which means to crush your civil liberties. So if you have an example from each, like let's take the strength idea, McCulloch versus Maryland. This is a court case where basically Maryland is trying to tax the national bank. McCulloch runs the national bank. And basically they're saying the national bank is unconstitutional. It's not in the Constitution. You can't do it. And the federal government is saying, wait a minute, the elastic clause gives us the ability to do anything necessary and proper of a power we already have. And we have the right to coin money. to regulate interstate commerce. We have the right to do this. So we're doing this in order to fulfill the national bank, that power. And the court goes, yeah, McCulloch versus Maryland, bam! That strengthens the federal government. It gives it more power than it had before. And then there's a whole bunch of these cases, right? Who gets screwed, right? Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy, right? Separate is equal. His right of equality, of the 14th Amendment, of being treated equal under the law, is crushed. Korematsu. Now, this is a little bit racist, and I apologize, but it's the easiest way to remember. It's Korematsu versus United States. This is a Japanese-sounding name. This is the Japanese internment camp case, where Japanese Americans that happen to be of Japanese ancestry, are being locked up during World War II for doing nothing. They didn't do anything. Their habeas corpus, their right to be left alone. Habeas corpus means that you have a right to be left alone. You have to show a reason in order to put me in the cop car. You can't be just like, hey, blue eyes, get in the cop car. What'd I do? You shot someone. Okay, I get in the cop car. I didn't like how you looked. No, that's what the Japanese Americans faced. So they went to the Supreme Court. They said, what about my habeas corpus? What about my liberty I was born with? And the court went, sucks to be you. That shrunk their rights. And then we'll take an easy one, like Brown versus Board of Ed. What happened to African-American rights in the South after Brown versus Board of Ed? They expanded, right? And we'll get into other cases like Mapp versus Ohio, Miranda versus Arizona. These are all expansive cases. So I've talked too much. What am I going to do? We should go back to the list. What time should this end? I'm going to probably stop about 10 o'clock, but you can always pause me, go to the videos. We have older versions of these as well. I've done them with other people, but I'm going to keep going and try to do the best that I can to answer the questions as I can. Oh, man. Talk about relevant and don't go off topic. All right, good advice. Here we go. So number 5, the Declaration of Independence. That's always on the exam. The basic idea is that it is a letter to England where we dump their asses. It's a Dear John letter. It's a breakup letter. So the Declaration of Independence, don't think of it as an organizing principle, an organizing document of the government. It's just some ideas in a letter we wrote to the king in Great Britain, where we basically said, Dear King, you suck. You violated my natural rights, like my right to be represented. And because of that, we're dumping your sorry asses. And that's what sparks, of course, the Revolutionary War. But at the end of the letter, the idea is that you need consent of the governed. Back to this idea that you're born free. You're born with natural rights, right? So in order for a government to exist, you have to consent to it. You have to give your permission for it. And we never gave permission for the king to rule over us. So that's the idea born in the Declaration. Consent of the governed and this idea of natural rights. Let's go to number 6, guys. Common sense on the exam every year. I call it the Book of Duh. Common Sense was written by Thomas Paine, and he wrote it to the colonists. It's like the letter that you would, Oprah would read, where she would be like, what are you doing, colonists? Are you stupid? Don't you know you should be free? They're violating your natural rights. Where is England anyway? Isn't it like on the other side of the water? Why are you letting an island rule you? You're stupid. It's common sense. Wake up. So the answer on the exam is always this idea that it woke up colonists. It's almost like an example of early media where you didn't know something. Another thesis on the exam is that stink don't stink until it's in your backyard. That you can't do something about a problem unless you're informed about it. So, the abolitionist movement is going to be sparked by Uncle Tom's Cabin. Books like The Jungle, written by Upton Sinclair at the turn of the century, are going to spark the progressive movement. They're going to wake people up. And that's what Common Sense did. It woke up to the colonists to the idea that we need to fight for our independence. I mean, no matter how much you were being oppressed, it would be hard to get you to pick a gun up and go shoot people. So Thomas Paine is doing that. He's convincing the colonists it's time to raise our guns. Now, there's not a lot about the Revolutionary War in the exam. We don't have to really worry about battles and such like that. Although I saw one question where it was this idea of what was the advantage that we had, because they should have won. It's the most powerful army in the world. We were just like these losers, but it's home field advantage and the want to win. That's always the why people win who shouldn't win. Why did Vietnam win? Vietnam beat us. because they had home field advantage and because they wanted it way more. So who wants it way more in the Revolutionary War? Some guy from London that was sent over to shoot us? Or some guy that lives in Pennsylvania that is protecting his wife and his daughter? That's what's going to win the day. Now, as we get into government, let's do a couple more, and then we'll go and maybe do one on the Twitter. We're on number 8 right now, guys, was this idea of the Articles of Confederation. I bet you didn't know, or you should know, that there were 2 constitutions. 2. Count them. 2. Both of them are examples, let's go back to this idea, of federalism. Now, the idea of the Articles of Confederation, this is on the exam almost every year, was that they didn't work because the federalism they created was too weak of a federal government. Now, think about this idea. We just broke up with Great Britain. We were being abused. Think of it like a wife leaving their husband who was beaten down for 200 years. And now she's going to form a new marriage. Is she going to date a strong man or a weak man? And the idea behind the Articles was a weak man. So the Articles of Confederation is an example of federalism, the division of power between the feds and the states. It was almost like we had 13 little countries. The Articles of Confederation is less of a unifying document, and it's more of like a friendship pact, where the states were like, yeah, we cool, we can hang out and such, but let's not marry each other. So each state had enormous power. States coined their own money. There was no president. If the aliens came down under the Articles of Confederation and said, take me to your leader, there would be no leader. There was no court system. There was no interstate commerce. There was no army. There's no army. The federal government had to ask the states for their own army. How about that? So that's why it's going to fail. But it's really going to fail because it wasn't flexible. They had an amendment procedure where in order to change the Articles of Confederation, they had to have all 13 states agree. How stupid is that? So Rhode Island was always like, no, I don't want to change it. I like it just the way it is. It's like 12 people are like, let's watch this movie. Rhode Island's like, no, I want to see a Chinese kung fu thriller. No one gets to change the Articles of Confederation. So in order to move on, we need an event. We need something to show the weakness of the Articles in order to wake up the people. And that's going to be the next one on the list, number 9. If you're joining us late, this list is right under the video at HipHughes.com, and it's Shays' Rebellion. So Shays' Rebellion occurred in Massachusetts basically because the Massachusetts government was sort of neglecting their poorer citizens in Western Massachusetts. And Daniel Shay was a soldier, a revolutionary soldier, loved his country that he did, but he felt as though his government wasn't representing him. Not the federal government, but the state government of Massachusetts. So he led a rebellion, Shays' Rebellion, where all of these ex-revolutionary soldiers who were having their land taken for debt marched to the Capitol basically to say, hell no. You know, Thomas Jefferson said the tree of liberty should be replenished with the blood of patriots like every couple decades. So Daniel Shay is living out this idea that we need to fight our government if it's not representing our consent of the governed idea, you know. And basically, nothing's going to happen. Daniel Shay, they're going to break that up. But it was a sign that we needed a stronger federal government, that if we couldn't even raise an army to protect ourselves from ourselves, what would happen if we were invaded? You know, what would happen if we really had a crisis? So it's Shays' Rebellion, and this is the Regents' question. What is the impact of Shays' Rebellion? It led us to want a new constitution. So we throw out the Articles, and we garner enough strength to have a constitutional convention to create the Constitution. So let's hit the Twitter really quick. We're kind of, well, I'll go over number 11 really quick because they do this. There is this question called the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So I have a funny way of remembering it. How about that? If you just say it like this, oh yeah, it's the Northwest Ordinance of Mama got you pregnant, Mama getting pregnant. I always called it the Mama getting pregnant law because it was this idea and it was passed under the Articles of Confederation. That's why they ask it. There's only 2 things that occurred that were good under the Articles of Confederation on the Regents exam. One is we fought the Revolutionary War under it. So obviously that's a good thing. It ran us through the Revolutionary War. We survived. But the other is the one law that was passed. You needed 9 out of the 13 colonies to pass a law. They passed this, oh yeah, it's the Northwest Ordinance and Mama got pregnant. It was a process for new territories to join the Union. So Mama is the federal government, and it's a process by where she can get impregnated with new territories that are going to be new states. So if you ever write about, and I'm sorry I'm like a pig man, I'm sweating. I've only been doing this for 35 minutes. How about that? Manifest destiny, this idea that we're going to expand westward, it's the mechanical process that allows for manifest destiny. You can't have, the Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1850 or California join the Union unless there's a law that allows them to. And that's the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, Mama got pregnant. How about that? All right, so why don't we stop there? I'm going to hit the Twitter, maybe answer a couple separate questions. We're doing pretty good. We've gone through 11 or 12 and a half hour. There are 12 notifications. Thematic essays, guys. I'll do the best I can going over these big ideas. Like, it's hard to say what the thematic essay is going to be. You have to know stuff. But I do have a couple of review videos in the U.S. history playlist that specifically target thematic essays. There was one on checks and balances. There's one on foreign policy. There's one, I think, on Cold War. So if you want to watch a couple of those, that might be a good idea. Can you delve into the weaknesses of the articles? I think I just did, right? No president, no army, no ability to tax. It's really hard to change the sucker. It's hard to pass a law. It just kind of sucks. They can't even coin money. Everyone had like monopoly money. It made no sense. It was like cats eating dogs. How about the Grange for Bark of Famine? That was the Counterbeast. Counterbeast 101. The Grange. You know how I remember the Grange? It's so stupid. Well, first of all, I watched Little House on the Prairie. So that says something about myself right there. But the Grange, first I'll give you the operational definition, was kind of a cooperative of farmers where they would kind of pool their supplies in order to have more power, in order to barter with the railroad companies and eventually lobby the federal government. I used your other vocabulary word as I explained the Grange. Lobby means to ask your government for change, to bother them, to protest, to meet congressmen, to make phone calls, to vote, lobbying. So the Grange where these farmers were getting together in order to ask for changes. And eventually they're going to get things like the Hepburn Act, where they're going to regulate the railroad, and there's going to be some rules because they were getting screwed. The railroad, how many railroads are there? It's like one. So if you're a farmer, just imagine it. What do you want to grow? Grow marshmallows, right? So you put all your marshmallows up by the track and you wait for the railway to come. And the train comes, and he's like, that'll be $5,000. What are you going to do? You're either going to pay the $5,000 and make no profit, or your marshmallows are going to, rot in the baking sun next to the railroad. So they organized the Grange in order to lobby for laws that made it more fair for farmers. How do I remember it? Oh, yeah. Home Grange, where the farmers, that's all I have, but it reminds me of the range and farmers and this idea, home on the range, that's where they lived, right? Of this idea of farmers, and then generally I can kind of get into the question. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. We'll go back through court cases as we get through these numbers, Cinema Boy. Who is that? AFC Cinema. I don't know if it's a boy or girl, but we're definitely going to do some ways to remember some Supreme Court cases. I wouldn't kill myself trying to remember all of them, but rather try to put them in those baskets of strength cases, like Marbury versus Madison. Just say the answer. Marbury versus Madison established judicial review. Say it with me. Marbury versus Madison established judicial review. It's on the exam every year. So now I'm going to dive into that idea. It doesn't matter what I go over, because everything I go over is going to be in the exam. There's this idea of everything in the Constitution, right? Checks and balances, the veto, writing laws, declaring war. And there's this idea of stuff we do that's not in the Constitution, the unwritten Constitution. So one thing that is the most powerful agent of change that's not in the Constitution is judicial review. You guys have lived through this. Gay marriage was illegal. 35 states, 30 states had it illegal, where if you were a man, you couldn't marry a man. If you were a woman, you couldn't marry a woman. Now, the change didn't occur in the states. They weren't going to do that in Mississippi. Nothing against Mississippi. That change came from the Supreme Court. where the Supreme Court looked at a specific court case of two men or two women trying to get married, and they said this isn't fair. There's an amendment, the 14th Amendment. No state shall deny its citizens equal protection under the law. You're doing that, Mississippi, and you're not going to do that anymore. So that idea of judicial review is not in the Constitution. It comes from an actual court case called Marbury versus Madison, which we're not going to go over. But it's just this idea that early on, the court gave itself the power. Power, it's a strength case. McCulloch versus Maryland, a strength case. And the other one is Gibbons versus Ogden, which was a court case between the state and the federal government about who was going to get to navigate a river. And at the end of the day, the court said the federal government has the right to regulate rivers because of interstate commerce clause. Now, you could forget all of that, but just remember, it gave the federal government strength. So every time we do that, back to that definition of federalism is the division of power between the feds and states, we're changing how that formula looks. The feds are getting bigger and the state power is getting smaller. And that's a consistent theme through U.S. history up to really the 1980s, where the federal government's going to take on more and more responsibility. And then we'll go through those other buckets, like cases that limit, Plessy versus Ferguson, Korematsu versus United States, and cases that expand your rights. We all know this, right? When they arrest you, what do they have to say? You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, we'll even give your sorry ass one. How about that? You think the popo want to do that? You think the police were like, we should just tell everybody what their rights are? No! That came through judicial review, where the court looked at a court case, and they looked at the Constitution, and they reviewed it judicially. And they said, the Fifth Amendment says that you have a right to an attorney. Why should someone not know that? If you don't know that, then it's like not having the right. So we'll make the police Mirandize everybody. Miranda versus Arizona. So what happened to all of these people's rights that were being accused of crimes? If their rights were like this before the court case, what happened? They expanded. So rather than just talking in an essay about the court case, talk about this idea of how judicial review allows for the expansion of rights, but it also allows for rights to be limited and kind of to give the government strength, like those early examples. That's called the Marshall Court, by the way. The way to remember that is to give him the middle name Schwarzenegger, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I always think it's John Schwarzenegger Marshall, because John Marshall was the Supreme Court justice who strengthened the federal government. You want to know George Washington's middle name? It's Schwarzenegger, because he has the Whiskey Rebellion under his belt. He is the strong president who leads us through the beginning of the country. Alexander Schwarzenegger Hamilton, because he's the father of the national bank, the economic strength behind the federal government. Those are some tricks. So give them the Schwarzenegger's names and you'll be all good. Miss Orban from Harrison High School. This one is for you. That was a shout out. I saw that people do that on the internets and such. Causes and effects of the Spanish-American War. I'm going to go off script a little bit for Angela, and then maybe we'll do a couple more. Good for us. So the Spanish-American War at its root, Angela, is a war of belly rubbing. Belly rubbing is imperialism, right? This idea that the United States was hungry because we were industrializing. You can't have no Hershey bar unless you got the sugar. So we needed sugar. So we saw a lot of that opportunity in Cuba. So basically, there's two vocabulary words that go into it. But first, the major causes are going to be, number one, imperialism, that we want their sugar. I mean, I don't think we should tiptoe around that. But in order to get the American people on board, you can't just say to the American people, let's go invade for sugar. You could say that, but it might not be that popular. They needed a little bit more sexiness, let's just be honest. So there's this term called yellow journalism, where basically William Randolph Hearst, who ran a newspaper empire, was going down to Cuba, and he was writing these sensational stories about what the Spanish were doing to the poor Cuban people. And not that the Spanish were like angels, but he was exaggerating. There was pictures in the newspaper of the Spanish frisking naked American women on merchant ships, and of starving little Cuban children that were being left to rot. And this sensationalism drove America to kind of want to intervene. That with the USS Maine explosion, all right? I don't want to say false flag, but false flag. We probably either blew the ship up ourselves or it was an accident and we used the opportunity to blame it on the Spanish and to invade. So as we were invading, there was a big debate. Mark Twain was vehemently at first opposed to it, based on the idea of democracy. Like, how can we be a democracy and invade other countries? So we passed something called the Teller Amendment. And I always remember it by, it's like, tell Cuba. Tell Cuba that we're not going to take their stuff. Tell Cuba that we're just the good guys and we're going to rescue them from danger. The Teller Amendment set down the principle that we were only going there to free Cuba. But of course, once we were there and we kicked, the Spanish's ass in a few weeks and we took the Philippines is even near Cuba. How about that? We passed something called the Platt Amendment, which went back on all of those promises. The Platt Amendment, after the Spanish-American War, gave the U.S. control to write their constitution, to able to intervene if we didn't like their treaties. American businesses set up in there, and Cuba kind of became like a little mob city for the United States under that. And eventually, that's going to steamroll into where the people are going to rebel under Castro. But wow, we got way, way off. Can you explain these third parties are in 18? I can't do third parties right now. The only third party on that list that I've ever seen is, I've seen the Populist Party. Who put that question up? Ella Team Shea. I've seen the Populist Party on there. The Populist Party is kind of this bridge party. Third parties never win. Here's a thesis. Third parties never win. They bring ideas to the table. And then usually one of the two major parties is going to adopt those ideas. So, for instance, the Populist Party came to Washington and they said, we want things like regulating the railroads. We want work safety. We want basic protection against child labor. Very basic ideas. We want an income tax. All of those ideas are going to be adopted first by the Republicans under Teddy Roosevelt in the Progressive era. The Hepburn Act is going to regulate the railroads. The FDA is going to label food and drugs. The Meat Inspection Act is going to regulate the slaughterhouses. I'm a vegetarian, though, and I'd rather not talk about that. And then later on, Woodrow Wilson is going to, well, he doesn't sign off on it, but under his reign, the 16th Amendment and income tax is going to come into being. But all of those ideas were born of third parties. Now, I've never seen the Know Nothing Party on there. There is a Know Nothing Party, but we're not going to talk about Millard Fillmore. I've never seen a question on the Greenback Party. The Bull Moose Party was Teddy Roosevelt's third party when he ran against Taft and Wilson in 1912, and he split the vote. There's an video election. You can go watch that. I think we need to go back to the list. I kind of want to grab my phone so I could just look at this. I wouldn't worry about the War of 1812, Brandon, really. Very rarely on the exam. It was a war over impressment. The British were kind of taking advantage of U.S. merchant ships, and it was really a spillover of a European war, but I wouldn't worry about that. The Korean War, I'm getting overwhelmed. I really am. I think I'm going to play a song for 30 seconds, and I'll be right back, guys, because I have to go get my phone. So we'll play this and be right back. I'll be right back. That was a short break. I just wanted to get my phone. How can I memorize the presidential orders, AFC Cinema? I would first check myself into an insane asylum. I don't know why you'd want to do that. Scopes Trial and Red Scare. I don't want to go off task too much. I'll do Scopes Trial for Christopher, and then I'm going back to the list. The Scopes Trial is called the Monkey Trial. And unlike all the other court cases you have, it's not a Supreme Court case. The Scopes Trial was really just kind of a media trial, to be honest with you. But on the exam, it represents the 1920s. Everything has a bigger, broad idea. The 1920s is the decade of change. You know, whether you have this idea of flappers and women going through cultural changes and kind of freeing themselves a little bit, you have the change of the Great Migration. African Americans have now landed in northern cities because of World War I, like Chicago and New York and the Apollo and the Harlem Renaissance. And you also have this change in the 1920s of kind of religion and science. You have a lot of people that are starting to debate whether we should be a religious nation or more of a secular nation. Secular means non-religious. And the Scopes trial is just a representation of that. Scopes was a science teacher. He was teaching evolution in Tennessee. And according to one of their state laws, you weren't allowed to do that. So there's this trial between teaching evolution and whether we should teach kind of the biblical creation kind of idea. And it's not about the outcome. Scopes actually got fined $1. It's not about that. It's about that being in the public eye and being something that we debate and that we talk about. So the 1920s, just think of the decade of change. And if you see the Scopes trial, put that in there and you'll see the answer. Faux show. Faux show. All right, I'm going back to the list, guys. Because if we don't go to the list, we're all in big trouble. My favorite color is aqua green blue. All right, here we go. Back to the list. So we were on number 12, and we're not going to spend years and years on each one. At the Constitutional Convention, you should know about 4 things. Number 1, oh my God, you should know we wrote the Constitution there. And that it was because the Articles of what? Confederation failed. Why did it fail? Because it sucked. Because the feds were too weak. I know that some of you said it. Congratulations. So the Constitutional Convention, basically, number 1 is to write a new constitution. And then we really have some compromises. Now, the compromises are all about my magic word. Go back to the colonial era. What's the magic word? I told you, starts with an R. It's about representation, because that's at the heart of how we do consent of the governed, right? It's this idea of, you know, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And the idea, in my analogy, is the chicken came first. The chicken is the people. The people lay the egg. The egg is the Constitution. But in order to do that, we need to get consent from the rooster, and that's why we vote. But at the end of the day, we are making the egg for the first time at the Constitution. We're debating about how we represent the people. So number 1, we have the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise is what is going to give us a bicameral legislature. Now, that's fancy, fancy, smart people talk for a 2-house Congress. There was different ideas. Remember, states have 2 things that are way different about them. Well, they have lots of things that are different about them, Mr. Hughes, but the biggest thing is population. This is what makes sense with representation. There are states like, what's the one? Virginia. Virginia was a very populated colony. It's a very populated state. So they want their representation based on population. They believe if you have more people, your voice should be louder. In states like New Jersey, like you shouldn't even hear those people because no one lives there. But New Jersey is like, if we're going to join the family, if we're going to be part of this United States of America, we want representation. Because if it's all based on a population, New Jersey will never get anything. Virginia will get their way every time. They're like, what are we going to watch today? We're going to watch The Bachelor or The Brady Bunch. And every night, Virginia's like, we're watching The Bachelor. And New Jersey's like, we never get to watch The Brady Bunch. So we're not going to agree to this Constitution unless we get some representation. So that's why we have a 2-house Congress. We have a House of Representation that's based on population. That's why we count people every 10 years, kids. Every 10 years, we have a census. Why do you think we want to know how many people live in each state? So we can determine the population for the representation. So if everybody moves 1 year, the representation in Congress will change. Have you ever seen the electoral map? Let's do a little really quick lesson here. We're going to switch screens really quick because this is going to make so much sense that your heads are going to explode. You're not even going to know what's going to happen. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, Mr. Hughes, you made my head explode, and I learned so much that I'm grateful forever. But if we look at, for instance, the 2016 Electoral College map, now I can teach you like 3 things at once. How about that? All right. So I want the one with numbers. There we go. We're not going to talk about that, but what we are going to talk about is this image that's up on the wall here. Okay. Have you ever wondered why the numbers are the way they are? Now, first of all, you should know what the Electoral College is. This is how we elect the president. And the idea is that you don't run one race, you run 50 races. This is the idea of federalism, right? Federalism is the division of power between the federal government and what's not in the, there is reserved for the states. Well, the states run their own elections. So every state runs an election and they get a magic number. And that magic number is a formula. First of all, everybody starts with 2. You want to know why? Because we have the Senate. Remember poor New Jersey and the Brady Bunch? Well, they're going to get to watch the Brady Bunch sometimes. You want to know why? Because in the Senate, every state gets 2 senators for their representation. So New Jersey can feel happy. So if you look at that map right there and you look at Montana, right? What's up with Montana? They have 3. Well, they have 2 senators. Guess how many House of Representation members they have? They have 1. Why? Because no one lives there. Their population is low. So if you look at the states that have big numbers like California, New York, Florida, their states have a higher representation number in the House of Representation. So first of all, the Great Compromise created a 2-house Congress. So we have to pass laws to the House of Representation, and there's like 438 members, every state based on population. Alaska's got 1, Montana's got 1, Hawaii's got 1, North Dakota got 1. And then as the populations grow, the states' numbers grow as well. But in the Senate, every state gets 2. And since legislation has to pass through the House and the Senate, New Jersey can always screw the bachelor. How about that? All right, the other compromise that you want to get, we're on number 14, guys. And I already went through it. You can see number 14 has the census in there, right? And that's related to the census. So this is a bad one. This is a compromise that bothers me. It's the 3/5 compromise. And this is a compromise that said, when we're counting people, the South was like, I got all these slaves. You should count my slaves. It's the first time ever the Southerners are like, slaves or people? Why do they want slaves to be people? Because they want more population. Because if you get more population, you get more of that magic R word. What's the magic R word, kids? Get more representation. And the North is like, no way. Virginia, you don't get to do that. First of all, they can't vote. So why should you get representation for them? It's not fair that you should be overrepresented in the Electoral College and in the House of Representation because you have enslaved people. So the compromise is 3/5. For every 5 slaves, Virginia and Mississippi and Alabama and all those states get to count 3 people in their census. So this is, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but a lot of people would argue that a lot of our early presidents, like Thomas Jefferson, would have never been elected if it wasn't for the 3/5 compromise, because the northern states would have had much more electoral power. But because of the 3/5 compromise, they're going to get, what is it, 3/5? 60% of their slaves counted in their census, and they're going to get, I don't know how many, but probably 15 or 20 congressmen that they shouldn't get because of the 3/5 compromise. Now, let's go to number 15. Number 15 is always on this exam. We'll do 15 and 16. Now, when the Constitution was finished, there's kind of this great national debate of whether we should pass it or not. It's going to pass. And it's going to be passed because we're going to add the Bill of Rights. Remember the shield? We're going to add that protection because there were many Americans who didn't like the Constitution because they felt as though it gave the government too much power. Only 20 years earlier, they had fought Great Britain because they felt they had too much power. So now our government is taking more power. So they were called the anti-feds. They were anti-federal government power, and they were balking. Rhode Island was like, we're not going to sign this thing. And a lot of northeastern states, they weren't thrilled with this idea. But at the end of the day, it's because of what's called the Federalist Papers that the Constitution is probably going to be ratified. Now, the Federalist Papers, back to that book of duh and common sense. Common sense is the book of duh for the Revolution. The Federalist Papers are the book of duh for the Constitution. It's not what's in the Constitution. The Federalist Papers is why we need the Constitution, why we need checks and balances, why we need limited government, but a government with power in order to protect our borders and to build our infrastructure and to build a nation. So the Federalist Party, becomes the party that is for central power. Washington was kind of a federalist. Remember, his middle name was Schwarzenegger. Alexander Schwarzenegger Hamilton was a federalist, and John Adams was a federalist, our second president. But we also had anti-feds, and early on, Thomas Jefferson was an anti-fed. He felt as though the states were giving up maybe too much of their power. And that's why they sent him to France during the Constitutional Convention. They wanted to get rid of him. They sent him to France. Out of here. All right, let's do number 16. We've kind of done already. The compromise between the feds and the anti-feds is the feds said, look, if you're that crazy scared about the Constitution, we'll give you a shield to protect you. That's the Bill of Rights. And we've already kind of gone through that hand game. It wasn't creepy if you're joining us late, but you can watch the Bill of Rights hand game in the video Arsenal, and I'll go through it all with you then. So I really don't want to go through all of the Constitution, guys, man. We really need to get into the history. If you want more Constitution, there is a whole Constitution playlist. I would say, know the elastic clause. That is a mechanism that gives the Constitution flexibility, because it says that we can kind of do stuff that's not in the Constitution as long as it's to do stuff that is in the Constitution. So it doesn't say you can have a national bank, but you can have a national bank because you get to kind of coin money and regulate commerce. And that's been debated through American history. Absolutely no, there's an amendment procedure. I always taught my kids one of the ways to remember the amendment procedure was to go ba-bump. 2/3 of both houses, 3/4 of all states. In order to change the Constitution, there's a few ways to do it, but the way we've kind of always used is you need to get 2/3 of both houses to agree first. You have to go to the House and the Senate and get a supermajority to add something to the Constitution. And then you have to get 3/4 of the states, right? That's like 75% of the states. So listen to the federalism. Remember, we've been saying federalism and over and over and over again because it's an essay sometimes. That's an example of federalism. 2/3 of both houses. We have to get the federal government on board here. They have to agree if we want to give women the right to vote, or to end slavery, or to lower the voting age to 18, or to limit 2 terms to the president. But then we have to get 3/4 of the states. Federalism. Federal government, states, power, separated. Very good. Okay. I kind of want to do a couple of amendments. We won't do them all right now, but I have some really groovy ways to remember some of them. The amendments that are on the exam, beyond the Bill of Rights, I've seen 13 and 14 and 15. I've seen 16 and 17 and 18 and 19. I've seen 22 and I've seen 26. Those are the ones. So the ways to remember a few of them is, first of all, combine 13, 14, and 15. Don't say 13, 14, 15. Say 15. 15. Because those are your Reconstruction amendments. All 3 of those amendments were passed right at the end of the Civil War and post-Civil War, and they all are dealing with kind of this idea of what we're doing with African Americans. 13, we end slavery. 14, we make Black people citizens. 15, we give Black men the right to vote. Through 15, free, right? Citizens, 14, vote. Free citizens vote. 15. 16 is easy to remember. The way that I've always remembered it, and it's so stupid, it makes me feel stupid to say it, is I always think happy birthday. And this is why. I think sweet 16. And I think, oh, sweet 16 birthday party. I get it. What would you really want in that envelope? Do you want a present? You want money. Sweet 16. Get money for your birthday. And that should bring you to the idea of income tax. There's no income tax allowed in the Constitution. So the 16th Amendment allows us to have what's called a progressive income tax. In order to have social programs, in order for the New Deal to exist, to pave roads and build things, the idea was we needed to tax rich people at a higher rate than we tax poor people. So that's the graduated income tax, the 16th Amendment. The 17th Amendment, I have no fancy way. Oh, I do have a way to remember it. The way to remember it is to spell 17. If you spell 17, what are the first 2 letters in 17? S-E. Can you think of a vocabulary word that starts with S-E? It's the Senate. Early on in the Constitution, The senators were chosen by their states. The states had their own mechanisms for choosing senators. And as time developed, that became very corrupt. It became who you knew and who you gave money to. So the Senate was seen kind of as a cesspool of corruption. So the 17th Amendment brought that back to direct democracy, not back to, made it direct democracy. So instead of the rich, fat politicians in Albany picking New York senators, you, the people, will pick U.S. senators. How many U.S. senators do we have? 2. What about Alabama? 2. Alaska? 2. Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Michigan. All right, let's do one more, and then we're going to go to the Twitter. If you have a question, you can tweet it. I'll try to answer a few as we kind of go through these at a faster rate. I think maybe what we need to do is I'll just take numbers in a little while, and we'll go over the ones that you want. One of the ideas on the exam is this idea of the House of Representation and how the House of Representation is different than the Senate. So I've always remembered as the House of Representation as a mad dog. I always see it as a mad dog. I think mad dog. Because one of the ideas is that they are elected every 2 years. So I think of that as a short leash. Like we have the House of Representation on a very short leash. Just like you would want to keep a mad dog on a very short leash. Why would you want to keep a mad dog on a very short leash? Because it might bite somebody. So how can the House of Representation bite somebody? They have the unique power to start revenue bills, to start tax bills. So the idea is that in order to make them accountable to the people, you give them very short terms, so they're close to the people. So if the House of Representation does something you don't like, if that mad dog takes a crap in your bedroom, every 2 years there's going to be a new election, and you can vote in a new House of Representation member. So there is that difference that the House of Representation serves 2 years. The Senate serves 6 years. They're supposed to be more comfortable in their jobs, maybe so they can make some of the tougher decisions about things so they don't have to run back and get elected right away. But the House of Representation, definitely this idea of short terms and having those teeth, this idea that they can tax people as well. Wow. All right. Down to like number 22, but I'm going to look on the Twitter and maybe we'll jump around a little bit because we only have about an hour videos, but don't stay up too late because that's never a good idea. We have some right here. Saw a question that said New England geography led to industrialism. Natural harbors, because the natural harbors in the Northeast have a lot of bays where ships can dock. It allows for easier trade, which means that merchants and industrialness is going to occur more in the Northeast than it is going to be in the South, which is more kind of plantation orientated and such like that. What is the biggest thing to worry about on the exam? Not knowing stuff. Can you explain the Great Deal? What's the Great Deal? You mean the Great Society or the New Deal? Jonathan's confusing me. Can you talk about the Great Depression? Why don't we do that, Cassidy, the Great Depression? Well, you know, my friend wouldn't see me for a long time and my girlfriend broke up with me, so I just was really sad. So the Great Depression. The Great Depression occurs with the stock market crash in 1929. But there's some specific answers on the exam that explain the causes of the Great Depression, because you can't just say the stock market crashed. There's a reason the stock market crashed. And make no mistake about it, the Great Depression is wicked bad. 25% unemployment. 1 out of 4 people couldn't find a job, and there is no safety net. So it's not like today where if you don't have a job, there's like welfare or food stamps. There's nothing. Nothing. No unemployment. There's no Medicaid. There's no nothing. So you're eating out of dumpsters and begging for food, literally. So why did that occur? And of course you have the Dust Bowl, which makes it 10 times worse. So there's a few answers, actually 3 or 4. Number 1 is overproduction. That's a magic word on the exam. I've given you a few magic words. Representation is a magic word. I've said Mississippi River is a magic word. And certainly overproduction. Overproduction is the idea that in the 1920s, the economy grew so fast, right? This idea of change in the 1920s. We have consumerism. We have people getting credit. We have all of these new things like vacuums and, ovens and inventions and stuff you plug into the walls that everybody went cray-cray. Everybody started borrowing too much money. And as people were borrowing and buying stuff, factories were overproducing goods, and especially farmers. They were overproducing. They were making too much stuff. And eventually what's going to occur is if you produce too much stuff, the price is going to dramatically drop. So if you're a farmer and you're growing bananas and you go to Wegmans and you bring like 19 trucks of bananas, Wegmans is going to sell them for a penny a pound, and you're not going to make any money. So farmers were the ones that kind of overproduced first, and they were the ones that suffered first, even before the Great Depression occurred. And by the way, it's that overproduction that screws the soil. All that overproducing of food created erosion, which led to the Dust Bowl, which is going to make it much, much worse. But some of the other causes I already mentioned, like credit, margin buying. Margin buying was a scheme that the stock market came up with, where you could buy a stock for 10% down. So if you wanted to buy Sears Roebuck, and Sears Roebuck was $100 a stock, and you had 10 bucks, and you were like, yeah, but the stock's gonna keep going up. So I'll put $10 down, I'll wait till the stock doubles, I'll sell it, and then I'll pay my 90 back and make 100 bucks. It's a scam, man, because everybody puts the 10% down. You owe 10% of $100 stock, so you owe $90. So when the stock market crashes and Sears Roebuck is like 43 cents, you owe $90, sucker. So margin buying is going to really wreck a lot of people's savings and destroy them. Also, banks weren't regulated. So bank isn't backed up. There's no insurance on banks. So if you put all your money in the bank and the bank burns down and the bank goes bankrupt, or the banker takes your money and goes to Aruba. I'm going to Aruba. Sorry, sucker. You shouldn't have put your money in the bank. So that destroyed people, because banks are going to close and foreclosures are going to happen and jobs are going to disappear. And that's what created the Great Depression. And that lasted for, a decade. And of course, the New Deal is FDR coming in as the doctor and saying, you have this Great Depression, let me fix you. And that goes to an era, because one of the other ideas is that the Republican presidents in the 1920s believed in something called laissez-faire. Hands off the economy. The best way to run the economy was to get the hell out of the way. It's almost like, what's the best way to help a runner? Don't get in the runner's way, and the runner will run faster and faster and faster. But the problem was that the runner started cheating, and the runner started doing things that were going to screw the country. So when laissez-faire goes wild and industry does things that are going to harm the overall economy, a lot of times people are looking for a federal government to come in and save the day. And that's what FDR, offered with this New Deal. And of course, you have all of those New Deal programs. But the big idea is they all do what? They all try to fix something. They all try to regulate a problem. They all try to make the federal government more of the fixer than the watcher. So whether it's the CCC, the Conservation Corps, where the federal government is creating jobs for young people and sending them out to the country to fix the environment, or whether they're doing the Tennessee Valley Authority and they're building dams in Tennessee for electricity. The New Deal is this idea of fixing the Great Depression. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. All right, we'll do another question. Oh man, La Caption. I've already done federalism many times. Rewind the video. Federalism is the division of power between the federal government and the states. Foreign policy. So for foreign policy, let's do the foreign policy dance. This is the stupidest thing you'll ever see. I can't do messages, guys. There's no way I can do messages. I'm not even looking. It's not fair. But if you follow me, you'll get 3 extra points on the exam. I already did the Constitutional Convention. All right. See, now you made me forget what I was going to go over. I got all excited. Foreign policy. All right. So for foreign policy, we've had like 5 foreign policies. So I'm going to give you like 6 questions right now. First of all, the dance goes like this. And I'll even put music on and talk through it because I'm getting bored. But I got to do a shot of Red Bull. I'm really, really thirsty. So why don't we put some disco on because it's so obtrusive and bad? What should we do? How about horrible. So the way I've always done foreign policy is the foreign policy dance, and it starts by drawing a circle around yourself. And this is the idea of Washington's isolationism. And Washington gave a very famous speech called the Farewell Address. And in that speech, he said, stay the hell away from Europe. Because dancing with Europe is only going to get you in trouble. The European gods are going to kill you. So the best way to strengthen yourself as the 98-pound weakling in the new school is to be isolated. So the first part of the dance is Washington's farewell address, or isolationism. I'm drawing an island around myself. And the next part is to lift your leg. I can't lift my leg high enough, but it's called the dog piss. And that's the Monroe Doctrine. The dance is to lift your leg and piss on Latin America. Because the idea behind the Monroe Doctrine, this is so disturbing. I call it dog piss because dog piss is to warn off your enemies. That this is my territory, right? Stay away. So in 1823, James Monroe issues the Monroe Doctrine, not really pissing on Latin America, but theoretically pissing in Latin America, to say to Europe, our side of the globe, that if we're going to grow as a country, we can't have Russia in Mexico, and we can't have Germany in Brazil, and we can't have Great Britain in Venezuela, because that's going to cramp our style. So the Monroe Doctrine is kind of a warning to those countries to stay away. So we do isolationism, the dog piss where you lift your leg, and then you rub your belly. This is imperialism. This is our kind of third foreign policy term. I'm rubbing my belly because I'm going through industrialization. The 1840s, the 1850s, the 1860s, the 1870s. As we industrialize and we turn into a country that likes Hershey bars, we need things to make Hershey bars. You need cocoa. You need sugar. So you need foreign land. So that is going to lead to these imperialistic conquests. The Spanish-American War, we go to Cuba. The open door policy, we open the door to trade with China. We have the Panama Canal. We have the Philippines that comes from the Spanish-American War. These are all imperialistic ventures meant to fill the belly of our need for raw materials. And then I do the shell, where I kind of duck down. And this is the idea right around 1913, 14, 15, when World War I breaks out, that we go into neutrality stance. I call it the shell because it's like the turtle going into the shell. And then as World War I, kind of happens, I knock on the shell. These are the knocks of the causes of us going in. What got us into World War I? We were in that shell, but something drug us out. It's the Zimmerman note. Germany going to Mexico, trying to get them to attack us. What you doing, Germany? We have the sinking of the Lusitania, unrestricted submarine warfare. And finally, when Russia pulls out of the war, we feel as though we have to go in to save the world. It is the war to end all wars. So Woodrow Wilson goes to Europe. That's coming out of the shell and fighting. I'll do the whole dance at the end, right? But after the war, where do we go? We go back in the shell. This is the rejection of the Treaty of Versailles. We don't join the League of Nations. We say to ourselves, we're better off being isolated, like George Washington said we should. And then we stay like that as World War II breaks out. And eventually, we come out again at Pearl Harbor, right? There's other things that get us out. Lend-Lease starts to get, we can't do all of that. But Pearl Harbor is the final knock on the shell. Once we come out of that shell, we ain't go back in until 2016, and now it looks like we might be going back in. But we come out, we fight World War II, and then the last part of the dance is the push. What am I doing? I'm pushing away communism. I'm containing communism. The Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, the Berlin Airlift, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. These are all episodes where we're not trying to destroy communism. We're trying to stop it from spreading to North Korea, to North Vietnam, to Western Europe, whatever you might have it be. And then finally, the last part of the dance, there is this kind of New World Order question. And sometimes I'll do this, like we're like the captain of the world. We're Superman, where we're saving places, like the Persian Gulf War. Now, there's a lot of reasons for the Persian Gulf War. You can watch my video. But one of the answers on the Regents is we're saving Kuwait from Iraqi aggression. We're saving them. We go to Somalia to feed hungry people. We go to Serbia and Bosnia to stop civil war. We're the saver man of the universe. And then 9/11 changes all of that. And I don't think there's too much modern foreign policy on there, other than maybe a little bit about preemptive invasion of Iraq. But if we do the whole foreign policy game, you do George Washington isolation, Monroe Doctrine, piss on Europe, I'm lifting my leg, imperialism, Spanish-American War, Panama Canal, into the shell before World War I, right? Zimmerman note, Lusitania, whatever. World War I, after World War I, rejection of Treaty of Versailles, back into the shell, right? Pearl Harbor, back out. World War II, right? Containment, New World Order when communism falls in 1990. So how about that for some foreign policy review? Thank God I didn't have to dance too much. I definitely need a drink of Red Bull, and we have to jump around on this exam, guys. So I'm looking at Twitter. The difference between the Articles of Confederation and the Declaration of Independence. The Articles of Confederation is the Constitution. It's our first Constitution. It sucked. It was real limited. The federal government had no power, but it was still a blueprint, a direction, a rule book. The Declaration of Ideas is just a Dear John, dump your ass, I don't love you letter. That's all it is. It's just a letter. A letter is not a constitution, all right? Whiskey Rebellion. Well, I didn't specifically go over it, other to say then you should really identify the Whiskey Rebellion with George Schwarzenegger Washington. I give him the middle name of Schwarzenegger because he's a badass, because he strengthened the federal government. I mean, you had Shays' Rebellion under the Articles, right? Where these ragtag ex-revolutionary soldiers almost overthrew the government of Massachusetts, right? Well, the Whiskey Rebellion gets crushed. Washington leads like, I don't know, like 30,000 men into Pennsylvania. He's like, I'm going to kick all your asses. I'm going to put the supremacy clause boot so far up your behind, you're not going to know what hit you. And the rebellion falls apart. So it's this idea that it's like a challenge to the government, but the federal government is strong enough in order to suppress internal insurrection. And then after that happens, like, you know, it's like if a kid comes late and you shoot him and hang his body at the flagpole, no one comes late after that. So after the Whiskey Rebellion, no one's going to be like revolting against the government or something like that. Satellite nations, spoil system. Well, satellite nations, this is Barca Fami. Satellite nations has to do with the Warsaw Pact, and we're really talking about post-World War II. After World War II, the world divides into two gangs, kind of like the Bloods and the Crips, right? So the Bloods, being the Reds, being the Communists, called the Warsaw Pact. And really, the Warsaw Pact is the Soviet Union. And the countries that surround it like satellites. So satellite nations are the nations that are in the Warsaw Pact, but they're really like part of the Soviet Union. So Poland and Czechoslovakia, East Germany, those countries are part of the Warsaw Pact. They're the Bloods. And the Crips, the Blues, that's NATO. And really that's led by the United States, maybe Great Britain and France, but this is our gang. And it's really kind of this gang philosophy that's going to really stop a lot of war. Because the idea is all for one and one for all. So if anybody starts a beef with anybody else, then everybody has to jump into the brawl. So it's kind of a motivation not to get, you know, aggressive, let's put it that way. But that's the gang philosophy of the Cold War. NATO, Warsaw Pact. How about that? Can I go over the 1990s? It's not really in the exam a lot, Des. You know, all that I've seen on the 1990s is this idea of the New World Order, that we are foreign policy-wise doing things to save other nations. There's the Persian Gulf War, where we, you know, saved Kuwait, the Bosnian-Serbia conflict, where we stopped civil war, and Somalia, where we feed hungry people. So it's this idea that, you know, New World Order, we're the only ones left. There's no Lex Luthor, it's just Superman at this point. So I've seen that question, maybe a question on the impeachment of Bill Clinton, but really, I wouldn't sweat the 1990s too much. Do a couple of other ones. You know, I'm not worried about Persian Gulf War, Erica. As long as you know the Persian Gulf War is part of New World Order. If you want to write about it, I'd watch the video that I made on it. But it's really the United States and a coalition that is going to stop Saddam Hussein from invading Kuwait. But there's a lot of backstory to that. Kuwait's not exactly a democracy. Kuwait has a lot of oil. So there's other layers to that story. But at a very basic level, that's all I'm going to say about it. So why don't we do a couple of ideas about the DBQ? So for the DBQ, I've always called the DBQ the peanut butter and jelly essay. So people have been asking me, what do I need to do in order to get a high score or even a passing score? Number one, dots or die trying. Whatever the dots say, please answer the stupid question directly. I got so frustrated because sometimes kids would say really smart things, but they wouldn't be talking about what we asked them. It'd be like saying, hey, what color is the tree? And you're like, you know, trees grow through a process called photosynthesis. Now shut up, just tell me what color it is. So actually write the question into your answer and then elaborate. Now, for a peanut butter and jelly essay or a DBQ essay, it's got to be half peanut butter and half jelly. They give you the peanut butter. That's the documents. So I don't want you to say the documents. I want you to use the documents. And that's the difference between somebody who gets a 2 or 3 and gets a 4 or 5. It's not about just repeating the document. The document's a tool, like a hammer. It's how you use the hammer to hit the dot. So if they give you, for instance, common sense. We talked about common sense. Thomas Paine wrote it in order to convince the colonists to fight in the Revolutionary War. And one of the arguments was that England was far away. Why should an island be running us? And let's say there's a quote in there and it says something like, you know, why should England be running us? If all you say is, as you can see, Thomas Paine wrote in Common Sense, why should England, it's so far away. Elaborate. It's so far away. What Thomas Paine was pointing out was the Atlantic Ocean separated us. And that separation is a cause for being independent. That's using the document, not just saying the document. And also jelly. Jelly is the outside information. You got to bring in something else. You have to say something that wasn't in the document. And now if you're really kind of not comfortable with that, make up something. Like make up an effect. One of the effects I believe was, and then put OI on the paper. And a lot of times it's that one piece of jelly that a teacher can use to give you a 3. Look, if you don't have jelly, or at least much good jelly, you're not going to get a 4 or 5. But you can get a mediocre score if you don't have jelly. So for goodness sakes, put in what you think the effect was. Bring in a current event. If it's about common sense and all you remember is, oh, he said something about how books change people's minds, then say another book that changed America was Malcolm X. When people read about that, they got angry. Now, is that a great example? No. But is it jelly? Yeah. It might be smelly, bad jelly, but it's jelly. So for the DBQ, please answer the dots directly. Use the documents. Say them, explain them, use them, and then bring in the jelly that relates to that document the best that you can. And do the best you can. But if it's formatted and you try to do the dots and you get some jelly in there, you should get a 3. If you get 2 3s and you have a 6, you can get like 25 out of 50 on the multiple choice. It's ridiculous. All right, so hopefully that helps you a little bit on the essays. I'm going to look if we have a couple more questions here. Impacts of the Gilded Age, social Darwinism, Gilded Age, Gilded Age, Gilded Age. So let's talk a little bit about the Gilded Age. How about that, kids? Can I have a sip of my Red Bull? Because I'm getting a little faint. Oh, we'll do sectionalism next year. How about that? Okay. It's a 20 ouncer. I feel a little disgusting. I probably look disgusting too. But so gilded. First of all, know what gilded means. A gilded watch is a watch that somebody sells you on the street corner. They go, hey, you want a watch? And it's gold and it's beautiful. And he goes, $20. And you give him $20 and you take the stupid watch home and you nick it. And the gold falls off and it's rust. That's gilded. Because on the outside, it looks beautiful and nice. But underneath the surface, it's disgusting. That's how we're describing, in a negative way, the industrial age. Now, the industrial age is sometimes called Robber barons or captains of industry. And the captains of industry idea is that the Gilded Age or the Industrial Age did create some positive things. Transportation systems like the railroad. We're going to increase eventually the standard of living, but not there yet. There are more jobs, that is true. There are more goods. There's more to buy, and there's more to sell, and there's more markets. So for some people, Industrial Age is really good. That's the surface. But underneath it, you're not in the Great Gatsby. It's not good. Tenement houses and overcrowding. There's no proper sewer systems or health care. The food supply is rancid. Work environment is horrible. It's unsafe to work. There's child labor. There's poverty and disease, and it's just horrible. So the Gilded Age is how that's allowed to fester for a long time. And we go back to that idea of how governments operate. And now when you're talking about government programs like the New Deal, that's hands down. That's the government, for good or worse, trying to fix a problem. We have Teddy Roosevelt's The Square Deal. When he passes the Meat Inspection Act, he's trying to make the meat safer to eat. Or when he passes the Hepburn Act, he signs it in order to try to make the railroads fair for the farmers. And the same for the New Deal and the Great Society and all that. But in the Gilded Age, the governments back then had a laissez-faire attitude. So their idea was capitalism and free markets will fix themselves. But that doesn't happen. And as, you know, monopolies are created and the rich get richer and they create super monopolies called trusts, there's going to be more and more of a gap between the very rich and the very poor. And eventually that's going to be brought out, number one, through third parties like the populists lobbying the government, number two, through groups like the Grange, but then through what's called muckraking. Now, I started with this thesis before. Stink, don't stink until it's in your backyard. A thesis is something that's true for all ages. Stink, don't stink until it's in your backyard. So if you're not upset about child sexual slavery, that's probably because you don't really know and have seen that it exists in this world today. If I showed you a documentary, you'd be angry. You'd want to do something. That stink, that problem, doesn't exist if you're not thinking about it, if you don't know about it. So like common sense woke up the colonists to revolt against England. The Federalist paper convinced Americans we needed a new constitution. Uncle Tom's Cabin showed Northerners that slavery was wrong. We're going to have muckraking in the Gilded Age that's going to tell Middle America that's doing okay. We're not doing okay. How's that hamburger, as you read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, that describes how rat feces and human flesh and disease and was in your meat? There's no regulation. No one's watching. And if no one's watching, they're trying to do everything for a fast buck. How the other half lives. These are these pictures. You probably saw them in class of child laborers and people that are all crowded into these disgusting dwellings in the cities because there's no place to live and the streets are running with filth. That was a picture book. That's a muckraking book, because when people read the book, they went, holy crap, that can't be the America I know. We need to fix that problem. And the same with The Octopus, which is about the railroads. And then later on, we'll have books in the 50s and the 60s, like Unsafe at Any Speed, when people really read about the gruesome deaths that occurred because we didn't have seatbelts. Muckraking. But stink, don't stink until you know about it is a thesis. So if you really want a good score on your essay, start with an idea. Change happens, but it happens slowly. And then you could talk about women's suffrage and the decades and decades and decades it took to pass the 19th Amendment, or gay Americans, or African Americans, or whatever Americans, and the length of the struggle to get the change. That's a big idea. Same would be true with the stink thesis. The same would be true with another one. We'll do another one because these are good ideas because they're true throughout the test. That when there's a crisis, when the beep hits the fan, someone's going to lose their rights. Don't believe me? Let's go through them. During the Civil War, Lincoln suspended habeas corpus for a lot of people that didn't do anything wrong, especially if you were a Southerner in a border state. Border states were states that stayed in the Union. Like, trying to think of one now, Kentucky. Kentucky stayed in the Union, right? But there was a lot of people that were pro-slavery. So Lincoln, during the crisis of the Civil War, went to Kentucky and he said, you have no rights. Get into the jail now. Go. Go in the hole, man. And they said, what, habeas corpus? I didn't do anything wrong. It's a crisis. I don't have time for you. World War I, we had a Red Scare and the Palmer raids where suspected communists had their houses overturned. In World War II, we locked up Japanese Americans that did nothing wrong. Why? Because during a time of crisis, we look for an enemy. We look for somebody to blame. After 9/11, how many Muslim Americans had, their houses searched or were being followed by the police or their mosques were being spied upon? And the same could be true for lots of other time periods, but that's a big idea as well. So let's keep going. We're going to jump around. The difference between the Spanish-American War and the Mexican-American War. They're not the same. Really, the Mexican-American War is a manifest destiny war. The Spanish-American War is an imperialism war. So we haven't talked about manifest destiny, but this idea that we have this appetite to move westward, to expand, to always be thinking, what's the new frontier? Now, the positive spin on this, it's kind of like Star Trek. Like, we're always looking for a place to explore. The negative is someone's usually there and we take their stuff. So manifest destiny begins, and this is a big idea I want to get to, begins really with Louisiana Purchase. This idea of Thomas Jefferson. And this is on the exam as well. One of the harder questions is his transformation as a constitutionalist. I always said that Jefferson held the Constitution tightly because he was a constitutionalist. He was an anti-Fed, so he believed that power should be limiting. Power should strap you to the rule book. So he believed that until Napoleon comes with all of this land. And he's like, Mr. Jefferson, would you like all the land? And in the Constitution, Jefferson would have to go to the Senate and get a treaty and get approval, and he doesn't do that. What does he do with his beloved Constitution? He's like, screw it, I want the land. Loose. He goes to be a loose constitutionalist, meaning he expands his power at the expense of state rights, but whatever. So that doubles our land mass right there. After that, the Mexican-American War, where we take not only Texas, which was an independent country, but we take California, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, and then we sign treaties to get the Northwest. That's all manifest destiny as we spread westward. But the idea is that's the root of the Civil War. That's the root of the Civil War. I wish that the Civil War was always about slavery. I wish when we were 13 colonies, we fought over it and freed slaves back then. But it wasn't a concern until we started expanding as a nation. And as we started expanding as a nation, it became about territory. With these new territories, these new lands that we got, were they going to be open for slavery? And now certainly there are abolitionists in the North that don't want slavery to expand for good reasons. But there's also people that don't want slavery to expand for not good reasons. Now, there's not really a bad reason to not want slavery expanding, but they're really more interested in immigrants getting jobs. And if there's slaves there, then that's free labor. That's not fair. They can't get jobs. And there's this idea about the balance of power in government. As new states come into the country, if they all are slave states, then Congress is going to be a slave Congress. So we have these compromises, right? In 1820, when Missouri joins the Union, we draw a line, the Missouri Compromise line, across the map. And we go, hey, problem solved. New territories, if you're below the line, you're slavery. Above the line, you're free. Don't got to deal with that again. Not so much. I've always said that manifest destiny is the cause. These compromises are Band-Aids, and slavery is the cancer. That's the underlying problem. But we go to the Compromise of 1850. We get the Fugitive Slave Act. Watch the videos on this. We're running out of time. I can't break sectionalism down other than to say the underlying reason is the expansion of slavery. And eventually, that's going to be sparked into the Civil War with the election of 1860. Let's see what else we got on tap for you guys today. Progressive era and presidents. I did Scopes trial. We'll touch on Jackson, and I could probably do Marshall Plan and Truman Doctrine. So progressive presidents, it's a great question. Just to go over big ideas. If I say a president's name, you should be able to do this or this. This means laissez-faire. This means they were presidents that didn't get involved with the economy because they believed that they shouldn't. So when we go into any president in the 1800s, McKinley or Grover Cleveland or all those guys, were basically laissez-faire. And certainly the 1920s, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover. That's why the economy grew so fast in the 1920s, because the government got out of the way. Of course, many problems were created. As opposed to presidents who said, there's a problem, let me fix it. Teddy Roosevelt, square deal, right? FDR, New Deal. Truman, fair deal, right? Who else do I got? Those are the big ones right there. But Ronald Reagan is a laissez-faire president. President Obama, the American Health Care Act, that's hands down. So basically, Democrats today are hands down and Republicans are hands up. The only Republican that's not hands up is Teddy Roosevelt. He's the only one. So that's one good way of thinking of the progressives are hands down. Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, Harry Truman. Hands up would be Republicans, Herbert Hoover, William McKinley, Ronald Reagan. Good for you. All right. I think I'm getting tired. XYZ affair, it's not on the test. It was on the test like 20 years ago. You can look it up, man. I don't even have a video on it. It's a foreign policy thing. It's not on the exam. I'm really not worried about it. What else do we got? I did Scopes. I have a Scopes video. If you want to watch that, go watch that. Now for Jackson, number one, he's the first Democrat. So Jackson, kind of the idea is the common man time. And we're not talking about common man like African Americans. We mean white, poor Southerners. That's the base of the Democratic Party. So he was able to get a lot of votes because these were new voters. People without property were first being allowed to vote. So Andrew Jackson spoke to them and basically said, I will represent your interest against the big rich people's interests that are against you. And some people equate him with like a Donald Trump kind of character. So one thing he did was he hated the National Bank. He saw that as an instrument of bankers meant to put down poor people. So he vetoed the National Bank. But at the same time, he was a nationalist. So one of the other more specific questions they ask is about tariffs. Tariffs were hated by Southerners. A tariff is a tax on an import. So if French underwear company is bringing underwear to America, right? Who wants a tax on it? Not the Southerners, because the Southerners don't make underwear. They buy underwear. Where do we have manufacturing? Someone asked this question before. In the North. So they want to tax the French underwear because they want you to buy the American underwear they're making in Boston briefs. The problem for Southerners is the tariff makes the cost go up. So Jackson is a Southerner. He should be against tariffs. So some of the states, when the tariffs were passed under his watch, said, we're going to leave the Union. That's it. We're done. We're going to nullify these tariffs. We're going to null and void them. And we will leave, if we have to, whatever we got to do. Jackson put troops on the border with South Carolina and said, no, we're the United States of America. That's a law. You're going to follow the law. So Jackson's kind of an odd character. You also have him being a big Manifest Destiny guy. So he's going to sign the Indian Removal Act, which led to the Trail of Tears, the removal of tens of thousands of Native Americans, thousands dead along the way. So Andrew Jackson might have some fans, but he has a lot of people that don't like him as well, especially minorities and Native Americans and such like that. So that might be on the exam. How about that? Now, I'll do Marshall and Truman because these are really great things to write about because it's hard to write about wars for the Cold War. I mean, if you want to write about the Korean War and you've watched my video or the Vietnam War video and you're comfortable writing about how they started, how they ended, how they're examples of containment, that's great. But some really, really basic ideas of containment can be found in the Marshall Plan and the Truman Doctrine, because they're non-military, really. One of the ideas is right after World War II, Europe looked like, you know, the crappy side of crap. It's bombed out, it's destroyed, everybody's living in garbage, they're eating cats and dogs, everyone's crying, it's, you know, trails of blood, right? So in order to stop communism from spreading, Harry Truman decides, under advice from George Marshall, the Marshall Plan, that we should just give Europe lots of money. We should give them billions of dollars, just billions of dollars. Well, why the hell would you give them billions of dollars? Because they understood that communism grows in mud and poverty. That if you didn't do anything, that Stalin and the communists could come and say, we'll save you the communism way. We'll feed you. We'll give you a chicken. We'll make sure you have a factory job. So the Marshall Plan, I call it the Momo Marshall Plan, because I think Momo, like Momo money, is to give Europe, and we offered it to Eastern Europe, the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union. They were like, yeah, no, we don't want your American money. So we gave it to Great Britain. We gave it to France. We gave it to Italy. We gave it to Spain. We gave it to Western Europe. And what they did with that money is they created infrastructure. They created civilization again. They created libraries and schools and hospitals and parks and roads. And that contained communism. That stopped communism from spreading, because money and wealth and happiness will repel communism, is the idea. Now, what else repels communism? Having a big ass gun. And that's the Truman Doctrine. And there were riots in Greece, communist riots, where the communists looked like they might take over Greece. I don't know how I got an accent, but they could have taken over Greece and Turkey. So what did Harry Truman do? He said, we're going to arm Turkey and we're going to arm Greece, so they have so many weapons and so much military infrastructure that they will be able to scare any communist revolt off or crush it. Again, why are we giving these people free guns and weapons and cannons and planes? To stop the spread of communism. If you can write about those two things, you'd be like a gangster and such. All right, we're going to do a few more, guys. We haven't touched a lot of this. The domino theory. What is the domino theory? The domino theory is the rationalization for why we have to do all of this containment stuff. Like, one might say, so what if it spreads? They'll find out it sucks and then it'll stop spreading. So what if communism goes to Cuba? So what if it goes to Vietnam? So what? It's not like, you know, it's dominoes. And Eisenhower and the presidents back then believed it was. They believed that if you let a country fall to communism, that it would influence the countries around it to fall, that would grow, and then they'd fall all around the world. That theory really didn't work out, because Vietnam fell to communism. We lost the Vietnam War, and while, you know, Laos went to communism, the other countries all around there didn't. It was just kind of centralized there. And Cuba went communism, and we had maybe have some communism influences in Nicaragua and Venezuela a little bit, but for the most part, it didn't fall all over South America. So there you go. How about that? That's the domino theory. What else do we got? In terms of court cases, I'll do that one more time. 3 sets of court cases, 2 for each, 6 court cases. That's what you need. I would do 2 strength cases. Marbury versus Madison established judicial review. That's the first court case. The court gave itself the power to determine whether laws and actions could be unconstitutional. And that, of course, is going to be hugely influential, because you don't have any other court cases without the first one, judicial review, Marbury versus Madison. And then I do McCulloch versus Maryland. But in terms of your other cases, please have 2 limiting cases. These are cases where the court takes your rights and shrinks them. Whether you have Korematsu versus United States. This is where Japanese Americans were interned, were put in prison camps in World War II. All of their rights were taken away because of the crisis of World War II. Not right, but it was done. And then take a court case easy, like Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy is an African American. He gets on a train in Louisiana in the 1890s. They say, what are you doing on that train? Get on the black train. And he says, no, the 14th Amendment. No state, Louisiana, shall deny its citizens, Homer Plessy, of equal treatment under the law. I be on this train equally like everybody else. And the Supreme Court all be like, separate is equal. They're like, just because you're in separate trains doesn't mean you're equal. Yeah, sure it doesn't. So that's a case that limited his rights. And then pick two cases that expand rights. I'll give you one Newport case and then I'll move on. I love Mapp versus Ohio. I love it because it's disgusting. It's the dirty little old lady case. You want to know about it? So Miss Mapp is a dirty little old lady. She's nasty, but we don't know that yet. But what we do know is that there's a suspect in a crime that we think is hiding out in her house. So police in Ohio show up Miss Mapp's house in 1960. Bang on the door. Open up, hit the po-po. She go, what do you want? We think that your nephew's here. We want to search for him. And she goes, you got a warrant? And they go, yeah, sure, here, we got a warrant. And they make up a phony warrant. She shoves it down her bosom. And then they look for the suspect. And guess what? He's not there. So they're kind of pissed. So they start like flipping over mattresses and they end up in her basement. They go through some nasty pornography. She a dirty little old lady. Miss Mapp. Ew, you disgusted. Obscenity charges. And she says, you didn't have a good warrant. You can't use that evidence against me. You didn't have a good warrant. Now, nowhere in the Constitution does it say what happens if you don't have a warrant. It just says that you should have a warrant. So in that court case, as the Supreme Court looks at what the Ohio police did and Mrs. Mapp's Fourth Amendment rights, they make a calculation and they go, look it. The 14th Amendment says that no citizen shall have its state deny them due process of law and equal treatment under that law. So by not having a warrant in the Fourth Amendment, you were violating not only the Fourth Amendment, but the 14th Amendment, because no state, Ohio, shall deny its citizen, dirty Miss Mapp, due process, search warrants. So they make a new law, a rule. This is an activist court. They call it an activist court because Mapp versus Ohio creates a rule that is like a law. You've seen Law and Order. It's true all over the country. If you find evidence and you have a bad warrant, you can't use the evidence against the person, nor can you use the fruit of that poisonous tree. So if I am the police and I search your house without a warrant and I find a map to the buried body, I can't use the body that I get from the map. I have to find a different way to find the body. So that's, believe it or not, an expansive case because it expanded our rights against the police. So I would say if you want more court cases, don't stay up too late. Go and look through my videos. There's plenty of court cases. So we're going to do a few more here, guys. We're approaching the 10 o'clock hour. I think I'm getting old. I think I'm getting more tired. How about that? There's so much that we haven't done, guys. Make sure that you go through the best you can the review that's on my website. All right. Most of them are linked to videos. I think at this point, if you guys want to like tweet me a couple numbers and I'll go over 3 more, but I just want to show everybody where the review lives and one specific video that might help you as you go to sleep tonight. And it's just like 10% creepy. So I'm going to screen share you guys right now. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube, you're killing unicorns right now. Like there's unicorns literally falling out of the sky dying because you didn't subscribe to my YouTube. And you also need to subscribe to my Twitter or you're killing little puppy dogs. And nobody likes to kill little puppy dogs. There might be some people out there. So this is the main page, guys, on HipHughes. So you're going to go to the video arsenal when we're done, if you want to just stay up a little bit longer. And of course, there's the Constitution. So don't kill yourselves in here, but if you see something and you really want to know more about it, you might want to look at a couple of these. You could see some of them we talked about tonight, some of them we didn't. But the big list for you guys is going to be in this U.S. history list. So don't let it intimidate you. Just pick some of the big ones that you've heard your teacher yelling about that you might not know very much about. And don't watch long videos. Watch ones that are 4 or 5 minutes, and hopefully that'll help you out a little bit. But if you go to the bottom of this, these are some of the bigger ones I would watch. So there's the reform thesis, that's an essay, the checks and balance essay, the crisis essay, and then immigration, which we didn't really talk about tonight. You might want to watch that video. We have a Supreme Court case video that's going to do all 3 kinds of cases I talked about tonight. And then right up here, there's the foreign policy dance, the DBQ, the thematic essay, and how to guess. And there are some ways that you can be probably a better guesser than you are right now. So we're going to look at the Twitter right now and see if we have a couple numbers to go over. And then we're probably going to have to call it a night pretty soon. So let's see. Looks like we don't have a lot of tweets, guys. There's one right here. Raina is the lucky winner. Raina says go over number 93. So we're going to hit that right now. So number 1 for LBJ's Great Society, what I would say is put your hands down. Just like FDR, the big idea is that the federal government, right, Lyndon Baines Johnson, is trying to solve a problem, the war on poverty. He thinks that we need to do things to fix the poverty problem we have in the United States. So his programs specifically are focused on helping people that are in poverty. So you have programs like Medicaid, which is health insurance for poor people, Medicare, health insurance for old people. Remember, we aid the poor, Medicaid. We care for the elderly, Medicare. Food stamps, that's another one. And then he has like housing and urban development. There's all of these programs, but they're all meant for the federal government to solve problems. And now people who oppose that, some of them would say, look, it's not that I don't like helping people, but the federal government's job isn't to help people. If anything, states should help people. But that's a debate about federalism, right? Federalism, if we go back to early in this video, is this idea of what our government is. Federalism is the division of power between the federal government, which this is today, a lot of power, and what the states still have. This is 10th Amendment power, reserved power, like education, even though the feds are trying to get involved in that. But say marriage and stuff like that. Well, the feds kind of got involved with that. Marriage age, right? Each state has its own way of setting the age, or dealing with driver's licenses, or death certificates, stuff like that. All right. 14 notifications, Mr. Hughes. We'll go over a couple other numbers. 91, please, please. Mella. Yeah, I have a great video on the Cuban Missile Crisis. But first of all, the Cuban Missile Crisis is where the Soviet Union is trying to put missiles in Cuba because they want to, get a better position in the Cold War. Now, they put missiles in Cuba for a reason. They were afraid we were going to invade. And we tried to invade. JFK launched the Bay of Pigs, a failed invasion of Cuba using Cuban exiles. It blew up in his face. So the Soviets were like, screw that. We're going to put nukes on the island now. And then we had U-2 planes that took pictures of that occurring. And JFK made the decision that that was unreasonable, that would change everything. One of the ideas of the Cold War is called mutual assured destruction, that nobody's going to press the nuclear button because everybody else would have time to press it. But if they have missiles in Cuba, there might not be enough time. People really thought the world was going to end. So the answer on the exam is a blockade, that JFK put a blockade up and that eventually the Soviet Union turned its ships around and packed its missiles up and went home. But at the end of the day, it was really negotiations between JFK and Khrushchev that led to the de-escalation of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And we did remove the missiles from the island. But at the same time, we made a promise never to invade Cuba again. And we didn't invade Cuba again. The CIA tried to kill Castro like 1,000,000 times, but we didn't invade Cuba again. So that would be that one right there. I see 99. Jonathan. No, who's that? Olivia. All I've seen for Jimmy Carter is peace in the Middle East. You know, whenever I think Jimmy Carter, I go peace in the Middle East, because he is the president that did broker the first deal between an Arab nation and the Jews of Israel. It's called the Camp David Accords. He got Egypt to recognize Israel as a legitimate country, and it's just kind of foundational because it's the first peace deal that was between Israel and another country. So if you see Jimmy Carter, just say peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East. How about that? Lauren says, go over number 100. Yeah, well, I just said that was it for Carter. Carter was also seen as a weak American president, mainly because he couldn't solve the problem of the Iranian hostage crisis. So, you know, I think the number says it all. You know, the idea was that Iran took American hostages. They didn't like our foreign policy. They had a revolution. They didn't want us in the country. They thought we were interfering. We kind of were interfering. We took their leader and put him in a hospital, and they wanted him back. So they took 50 hostages. They kept them for 444 days, which ran through the presidential election. So Jimmy Carter, you know, didn't look very strong in that election, did he? Not being able to free the hostages. And it probably helped Ronald Reagan win election. Karen says number 92. I've already done that, guys. You know, the Warren Court, I didn't say specifically the Warren Court, but the Warren Court are all of those expansive cases of the 1960s. The criticism is they're too active of a court, that in a sense, their rulings are making new laws. And you can make that argument. You know, Roe versus Wade legalized abortion. Mapp versus Ohio created the exclusionary rule with search warrants. Miranda versus Arizona makes the cops read you your rights when you get arrested. Gideon versus Wainwright gives you a lawyer in all 50 states if you can't afford them. Those are activist decisions. Those are the decisions using the 14th Amendment. Like, you know, it says, look, the 5th Amendment says you have the right to an attorney. It doesn't say how you get one. But the 14th Amendment says that no state shall deny its citizens of due process under the law. How can you have due process if you don't have an attorney? So you go pay for them, state. So it's like a law, but it's a court decision. But that's the idea. They're expanding people's rights, but they're also creating a more active federal government and specifically a more active judiciary, as opposed to people that believe in a restrained judicial branch that doesn't make laws, but just interprets the Constitution literally. I'm running out of steam, guys. There's 13 more geography questions. You know, the big ones are the Mississippi River being related to trade and commerce. That's going to be early on because that's going to lead to the Louisiana Purchase, which gives us access to the Mississippi River. Eventually, that with the Erie Canal is going to create a waterway from the Midwest, from the food belly, to the merchant class and where the people live, right? So that's going to drop the price of food and allow us to start exporting to other places. The other geography question really is the colonial question about how harbors in the Northeast allowed for a merchant class to develop. More manufacturing, plus there's more natural resources, right? There are no oak trees to cut down in Alabama. Maybe there is, I don't know. But there's no fur trappings in Alabama. So, you know, all of those natural resources, along with the natural harbors, the geography of the Northeast is going to allow for the evolution of big business, as opposed to the agricultural geography of the South, which leads itself to a slave society. I saw a question about the Appalachian Mountains being the western edge of the colonies once as well. And that's all I'm going to say about that. How about that? You know, we could do this forever, guys, but Mr. Hughes is running out of steam. I'll do one more, the one that I point to. 124, and then that might be it. 124, there's so many. I don't even have a 124, you dummy. You suck. All right, guys, I think we're going to end it here. I went over maybe half of the exam, if that. We skipped around a lot. Go through the review sheets, but don't stay up too late. The one video I did want to show you And I'll tweet it right now. So one of you guys hang out with me as I talk about it and find it. So it is a meditation video to help you go to bed to U.S. history. And I promise you it's not too creepy. So I really thought, you know where it is? It's at the bottom of the stupid thing. Where is it? Yeah. If you go all the way to the bottom of this, guys, right there. Use this to fall asleep and a guided meditation of the exam. So that video, you can literally fall asleep to, and it would help you with the exam. And I promise that it's not creepy. I'm not going to do anything weird. I actually teach you how to fall asleep. If you're not a good fall asleeper, I teach you how to self-meditate and fall asleep. And then when you're sleeping, I'm going to take you to a magic place where you're going to find the exam and discover all the answers. How about that? But seriously, don't stay up too late. Your body doesn't work correctly if you don't get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. So you need to go to bed soon. And please, have a breakfast in the morning. I know I sound like your grandpapa, but seriously, it's like biology. Like your brain won't work right if it doesn't have fuel. So eat a good breakfast, get some sleep, maybe watch a couple videos, and then use your instincts. You know, people ask me how to guess. I tell them their strategies. Look for answers that are similar. Look for a throwaway answer. Look for magic vocabulary like representation or Mississippi River, you know, things like that. But at the end of the day, you know, you've learned stuff you probably don't know you've learned. So trust your instincts. If an answer pops out at you, it's probably for a reason. Sometimes we just know things and we don't know how we know them. So don't spend too much time freaking out. Trust your instincts. And, you know, if you're really stuck, circle it and go back to it. Maybe you can get some help later in the exam on it. But remember those big ideas. And here's the last thing I'll say. The answers generally don't make us look bad. Generally, they're not going to be like, the U.S. sucks. The answers are generally positive, forward-leaning, progressive, generally speaking. Make sure you finish those essays. If you skip an essay, you might as well just skip it and go fail and go to summer school because it's not going to work out. Even if you feel really bad and uncomfortable and stupid, spit out 4 essays, answer the questions directly, even with the wrong answers. And it might be the difference between, you know, 3 or 4 points that are going to push you over the edge. All right, guys, that's all I'm going to say. If you're taking government next year, we have a whole government course online as well. Tell your friends to subscribe. Tell teachers about me. It's really easy to have a viral YouTube channel when you like have fluffy kittens or throw up or stuff like that. When you're talking about history and education, it's harder to spread your wings. So I depend on students like you and teachers out there to spread the good word. Subscribe to YouTube, go to Twitter, follow me on Twitter, and best of luck. And remember, doing really good on these exams doesn't make you smart. What makes you smart is your desire to know more, your will and your intent to do better, and experience. So just keep at it, and whatever you're good at, do better at it. All right, guys, I say it at the end of our lecture because I mean it with all my heart. Where attention goes, energy flows. Good luck on the exam tomorrow. You all deserve to do well. That's it, baby.